Hey, good morning, everybody. As you can see, I'm going to Bob Ross you guys today up here. So if you are new here with us, my name is John Wagler, and just want to say thank you for choosing to be here. And if you're wondering, do we have heat? The answer is no. So that's not our call, though. So this is why it's so important for you to be here on Sundays. We need your body heat to make this bearable. So, but hey, we are starting this new series called What If? And really what the premise of this series is really to get us to dream a little bit. And to have more than just our personal dreams, to have God-sized dreams, to be able to kind of have the kind of mindset and the kind of community that begins to look at things and say things like this: only God could have done that. Only God could have come through like that. And so instead of just being like, hey, what's my personal dream and what I can do, to begin thinking a little bit bigger. Part of this goes along with this word called potential, which is a daunting word sometimes. How many of you guys have had a parent say to you at some point, you're not fulfilling your potential? You have so much more, right? Like, and right now you just feel so bad, right? Like, so there's this, sometimes parents just do stuff like that. They say, like, man, you have so much more potential than what you're doing. And at that moment, you probably don't care that much, but it's probably pretty true. But the idea of potential is kind of critical to how we think, and maybe even understanding the potential that we have with God. And so I want us to look at some things. So if you're kind of trying to figure out your faith, and I want you to see throughout these next 3 weeks the potential that is there and what God wants for your life. If you are a follower of Jesus, I want you to be challenged over these next few weeks together of what it means to actually see the potential that is there within our community. When I think about the word potential, I think about this 12-year-old named Goody. That was his nickname. I was 11 at the time. He was 12. And we played Little League Baseball together. Goody hit 18 home runs as a 12-year-old. The next closest person was 5. And Goody was this mammoth of a kid and had all this potential. But come high school, Goody couldn't even make our high school baseball team. And Goody, he stopped growing at 13. That was part of the problem. But the other problem was, like, he made some poor choices that really limited his potential as an athlete. But we see these potential things happen, like with other musicians and athletes. Sometimes we even see it with like pastors and churches and stuff like that. We think this, man, whatever happened to them? They had so much potential. And when I started thinking about for us as a community, I started thinking about what's our potential? What's our potential together to do something? What is our potential? And it got me to start thinking along these lines. Do I think about our potential, and are the dreams for our community, are they more centered around like the dreams that maybe Lacey and I have for our community, or are they centered around what God has for our community? Because those are two very different things. Like, there are dreams that you can accomplish on your own, and you can accomplish with great skill and maybe a few good people around you. You can do those things. But man, when God comes in, it changes everything. The dreams begin to change. The vision begins to change. I wrote this down this week. I said the God-sized dreams become reality when we have the humility to know they are beyond our capacity, and the awareness to know that they won't be accomplished without community. Sometimes we live our lives without community. If you're living your life without community, and in particular a church community, then you are not living out a God-sized dream. It's just not how it works. Like, you can't be living on your own and also fulfilling a God-sized dream. It's just not how it works. It's not how God designed all this to be. It's not a thing. And I started just thinking about this, like, but we've got to start having God-sized dreams and start really provoking people. And that's what this whole premise of What If is really about. And so this question that I think is really important right off the top is really this: how many of your dreams require God to be involved? Seriously, like, if you're looking at your life and your thought process and what you want to do in the future or whatever, how many of them require God to be involved? For followers of Jesus, like, we should be able to rattle off some. Man, only God could do this. Only God could do this. Only God, like, God has got to be involved. I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do this without a grouping of Christians around me. It can't ever get accomplished without God involved. If you don't have an answer to that question, then I would say you're just living out your own personal vision. You're just living out what you want to do. You're just living out just kind of this concept of like, hey, I'm just going to accomplish some, and you could accomplish some very good things. I'm not saying you can't. You could, but they aren't God-sized. God-sized makes us realize, man, they're far beyond our capacity to do so. I want us to think together about our potential as a community and see what could come as a result. You know, our potential will only be as high as what we think God expects of us. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about for a second, what does God expect from me? You know, what I tell our premarital counseling class is that at the heart of every single conflict you'll ever be in relationally is unmet expectations. Like, that's it. So name a conflict you've been in relationally, and it's always because of unmet expectations. You thought something was going to happen, and the other person didn't meet that expectation, okay? Or vice versa, whatever it was. And sometimes I wonder if we do that with God. That some of the conflict we have internally where we don't feel fulfilled, where we don't feel like we're reaching our potential, where we don't see God moving like we should, I wonder if that's because we actually don't know what God expects from us. And so because we don't know the expectations, there's no way for us to even try to meet them. I wonder if we sometimes expect things from God to be like that He's just our vending machine, or He's just at a beck and call, and He's got to answer every single prayer we ever have, even if it's not the best for us. I wonder if that's what we think about God. That's what we expect of Him. And so it creates this conflict. And so I want to talk about today about maybe looking at a couple of different things that God expects from us. And I want to challenge our community in this season. We used to call this the Share series, but we changed it to What If, because I just wanted us to have this mindset of like, what if God? And then ... and leave it there. What if God, that becomes our mindset as a community? So I want to take a look at 1 Corinthians 3. And this guy named Paul writes this letter to the church at Corinth. Now, the church at Corinth was absolutely wild. All right? Like, if there was a church like the Church of Corinth in Richmond, I would tell you not to go to it. I would tell you, like, don't listen to anything they're teaching. Like, it is wild. I mean, like, the Christians, like in the Church of Corinth, they would even attend this temple that had about 1,000 prostitutes in it, and they just thought it was normal to go sleep with women and then turn around and go back to their homes, and then later on preach Jesus Christ crucified and raised from the dead. All right? And so Paul came in and he's like, no, like that's not a thing. And so he writes this letter and tries to get them to think differently theologically and practically and begin to understand what it means to follow Jesus in a better way. And so I want us to look at a couple of things in particular off this passage, starting in 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16. It says this, don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God lives in you? God will destroy anyone who destroys this temple. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Stop deceiving yourselves. If you think you are wise by the world's standards, you need to become a fool to be truly wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness to God. As the scriptures say, He traps the wise in the snare of their own cleverness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise. He knows they are worthless. So don't boast about following a particular human leader, for everything belongs to you, whether Paul or Apollos or Peter or the world or life and death, or the present and the future, everything belongs to you, and you belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to you. So here are just two things here today. The first thing is this, that God expects us to represent Him. God expects us to represent Him. Paul starts off and he says this, he says, hey, all of you guys together. He doesn't say just you as an individual. He says, all of you guys together are supposed to be united. Your lives are supposed to be woven in together, that all of you represent God, that the Spirit of God is working within you, that you are the temple, like the place where people discover like the presence of God, like that all of you together, there's this idea of unity, there's this idea of team, there's this idea that we represent God. Don't raise your hand on this, but how many of us woke up this week at any moment and thought this, God, I realize you expect me to represent you well today, and I pray that I'm going to do that. How many of you walking into work this week paused for a second and said, God, you expect me to represent you well in this place today, and I'm going to do that? How many of you walked into your home, and you got there before your husband or your wife or your kids, and you thought, God, you expect me to represent you well today? How many of you went to your friends on Friday night or Saturday night, and you're getting together, and before you went out, you thought, God, you expect me to represent you well tonight. You see, I don't think we think about the expectations enough. I don't think we raise the level of what God expects from us enough. And so we end up doing our own thing. And our own thing might feel good for a minute, but it doesn't last. And it doesn't create God-sized vision for our lives. And so what Paul's getting them to think is like, all right, your lives are woven in together. And even Jesus talked about this in John chapter 17. They detail out one of his prayers. And in his prayer, he talks about that when the people of God come together, that the people that don't know God will think that God is real because of the unity of the people that say they believe in him. That there should be something different about a grouping of Jesus followers that get together, that when people get around it, they're like, we've never seen this before. We've never experienced this before. We've never seen this kind of generosity, this kind of love, this kind of grace, this kind of forgiveness. We've never seen this kindness before. We've never seen it. But man, when it comes together, it's unbelievable. And so it's this idea of having a team. That's why we talk about a team so much here. And we stay away from the word member. This isn't a slight to any church that says membership. It's just member implies that you get something from it. Team implies that you have a role. And so we always want people to have this idea that, no, I'm a part of a team here. I'm not part of a membership. I'm not here to consume. I'm here to be a part, that I have a role. I have a gifting. I want to be a part of this. I'm not just here to come in and out every Sunday. I want to be a part of this community. I want to make a difference in this community. I want to serve other people in this community. I want to make sure the experience is great for other people. I have a role to play, not just consume. Consuming's my vision. Consuming's my preference. Consuming is what I want to do. But man, when I think outwardly, then that's God's vision for my life. And so we talk about team, about having a role. We talk about team where you appreciate each other's gifts. And that every gift matters. If you've ever been on a good team, everyone honors each other's giftings and roles and appreciates it. And no role is more important than the other. Everyone kind of does this thing together. It's important. This idea of team means that you can do more together than you can on your own. You can do far more with other people than you ever could just by yourself. And so Paul's trying to get us to understand this idea of coming together. Your lives are woven together. And he uses this phrase, he says, hey, that you are the temple of God. And this would have been a massive thing for him to say about a grouping of people. He's like, you're the temple of God. Now, to those folks to hear the temple of God, they would, in the Spirit of God, they would have been going back so far in their history. So they would have known all about Ezekiel, who was one of the prophets of God, who talked about how the Spirit of God would begin to move in the people. And so immediately when they would start to hear that Paul says that the Spirit of God is within all of you together, that you represent God, that what the folks then would have been like, whoa. I remember hearing this. This is like what Ezekiel was talking about. That was so long. This is crazy. Paul, are you saying that like this is what it means now? And Paul's like, yes. To a listener back then, they would have thought about this idea of the temple, which for the Israelites, the temple was a place where they had the place called the holiest of holies, where the presence of God would be housed. And so Paul's sitting here saying like, whoa, you're saying that we are the temple now? Like it's not like a building, it's like that we together, we are the temple. And Paul's like, yes. And then listeners would have also been like taught that Jesus even talked about how he himself compared him to the temple. So Jesus, he said, I'm the temple. It's like, so when you're near me, like you experience the presence of God. That's what this whole thing was. So here's Paul trying to craft this language and get people to understand that together, woven in together, that you guys are the Spirit of God, you are the presence of God. That when people get around Christians, they should say this must be the presence of God. I've never felt this way before. I've never experienced this before. This is the presence of God, that together, that's what we represent, the presence of God. That's the high expectations that we represent him so well. In the presence of God and with the temple, this idea that there was so much honor, there was so much reverence for the temple. So can you imagine, because God expects that from us, shouldn't we honor our mind, our body, and our souls so well? Shouldn't we have reverence for those things and for each other in that way? That we should honor those things, like just like they did with the temple, just like they did with Jesus. Why? Because together we honor each other. We value each other. We value our mind. We want to get healthy emotionally, spiritually, relationally, physically. That's what the last 2 months was about. But we do that because why? Because we're the temple of God together. The Spirit of God, the presence of God. This also means that it matters to continue to be together. When I've ever heard someone say something like this, I love Jesus, but I don't love the church. That's like someone saying to me, Wags, I love you, but I don't love Lacey. It'd probably be reversed. There's just a reality that like you can't say that. Here's why. The church was God's idea. The church is described as the bride of Christ. And so we go together. You can't say, I want Jesus, but I don't want his church. Because then you're saying, I don't want Jesus. And so it matters. It matters to gather together. It matters to be consistent. It matters to continue to celebrate together. It matters to make this a commitment. It matters to honor this time together. It matters not out of guilt. Listen, if you feel compelled out of guilt to come to church, that's not what I ever want to do. This is about like, no, we honor this time. We revere this time. Why? Because God designed it to be this way. For us to come together and celebrate together. Is it just on Sundays? Heck no. But it means that we should want to and desire to have this a part of our regular rhythm of life. That this is a celebration of what God is doing. We're supposed to do this together. And listen, has the church screwed up? Yes. Has the church done some really messy things? Yes. Has the church been part of starting wars? Yes. Has the church done some atrocious things throughout history? Absolutely. But it's also done some great things. Some unbelievable things that never would have been done if it weren't for the church. If it weren't for his people having a God-sized dream of what could be. And so this should be a thing. And part of this of gathering together, and listen, I get it. Like sometimes you're just like, I don't want to go. I'm not feeling it today, whatever. But as I was sitting there in the back, and I was thinking about this, how people have said over the course of 5 years, people have said, like, I didn't want to come today, but I'm so glad I did because I didn't want to get off the couch. But man, when I got here, man, God just did this in my heart. And it wouldn't have happened if it didn't show up. Or how about this? I've heard people say something like this. I did not feel like singing today whatsoever, but I looked across the room and I saw someone just doing this, going after it. You know what's funny about that part? I didn't even say this in the first part. You know what's funny? Almost every time someone has said that to me, it says that they saw a guy. It sounds like a slight on you females. They've said this. I looked across and I saw this guy just singing. And it's something that struck my soul. And so, get this. The way you sing could be ministering to someone else and you have no idea. No idea. And so, but you wouldn't know that if you're not here. And so it's just part of listen, y'all, I get it. Some life happens or you travel. Understand what I'm saying here. This should be a priority. Because this is part of God's church, woven in together, doing this together. In verse 17, he does something interesting. He says that God will destroy you if you try to create division in his church. He doesn't say, hey, God's just going to be like, hey, that's not cool. He uses the language, God's going to destroy you if you try to create division in his church. Well, what does that look like? Well, that looks like people who are incredibly negative, who are complaining about everything, who are the people trying to gossip all the time, or the folks that maybe sit in the back small group and kind of chirp to their friend, roll their eyes, be really negative, right? Not here. Causing division. And listen, you'll get more grace from me than God in this scenario. And you might be thinking whoa, Wags, you're saying to destroy me? I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. Paul wrote that. Right? He said that this is what's going to happen. And so it takes it seriously how we're supposed to treat this together. Have high expectations together of what we represent together to do something only God can do. You know, I'm thinking about how for our potential as a community, I started thinking about different ways of what we can do together. And part of this kind of share season with the share offering coming up, we talk about generosity a lot. And so you'll hear us tapping into that over the next few weeks together. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than just generosity, but that's part of it. And I just started thinking about this. man, it's crazy what generosity can do. We have, on a typical Sunday, we can have as many as 1,400 people coming in, and we probably, though, have I would say 1,800 active adults, and then, a few hundred children that are a part of our community, maybe a little bit more than that, but let's just say that's the regular attenders. And I just thought this, man, the average person in Richmond makes $60,000. For some of you that might seem, whoa, that's crazy. Others would be like, yeah, of course. And so there's, the average money is $60,000. I thought this to myself. I was like, man, if every active adult in our church just gave 5%, and if the average was 60, we would easily give away $3.5 million more this year than we will this year, like what we're already planning on doing. That's a lot of money. And you might think, no, you want to pad your pockets. You want to get a nice new... Listen, y'all, we are transparent as all get out with our books. You want to know what people make, we'll tell you. You want to know where every cent goes, we'll tell you. Because we respect the fact that people are giving, and we are not in this to make money. And so I'm telling you, we have our budget that's there. If we had the extra money of just 5%, listen, if I told you were going to work tomorrow, you're getting a 5% pay cut, you know what you would do? Be like, that sucks, but I just got to make some changes. You wouldn't be like, how can I live? Right? Now, some of you might be, there might be somebody here that's really hard, and that might be true, but for most of you in this room. So even just the thought of 5%, we would give away over $3.5 million more than what we're going to give away this year. Do you think that would have a large impact in Richmond? Do you think that would revolutionize some of these organizations we partner with? What if we lived that way? What if we thought about the expectations that, God, here's what's crazy about generosity. Every gift that you have, it deeply matters, but generosity is the only gift that dictates the pace to which God's vision is accomplished. So you might be really good at a lot of different things, but here's what generosity does. It can increase the pace to which something happens. And so to just think about these things this way, what happens when we come together and we do this together, we're woven in together, that God expects us to represent him well. Here's the second thing. God expects us not to have limits on our vision. In verse 18 through 20, he says, don't go by man's wisdom. Yep, there are some wise things out there that are valuable, but don't hinge everything on man's wisdom. It's not about that. It's shoot for something more. God's vision for our lives, God's wisdom for our lives is far greater. Don't set limits on it. It's far greater than what man will ever tell you. In verse 21 and 22, he talks about how stop letting everything hinge on a person. When our faith and when our vision hinges on a person, it will limit our vision. When it's set on God, there are no limits. And so he wants to get them to understand, listen, I love our staff. I think the world of our staff. But don't hinge your entire faith on our staff in this church. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. We've seen this, when maybe these large churches in particular, when a pastor does something and it has a big fallout, whatever, and thousands of people leave the church, and thousands of people are I don't want anything to do with God anymore, and I don't want anything to do with Jesus, this is all a farce, whatever. And I understand why that happens with some folks, but every time I'm no, that person was just human. That's not the basis of this. As I was thinking about that part, I said that when we value the messenger over the message, our faith is built on someone else's foundation, not Jesus. That limits the possibilities of what God can do in our life. And so, and what God can do in our community. God-sized vision, God-sized dreams. Does leadership matter? Of course it matters. Listen, y'all, whenever I read in James where it talks about to those who decide to teach, you have way more accountability and you'll be held responsible someday. So someday I'm going to stand before God and he's going to hold me accountable for what I taught up here. That's kind of a thing. It's a big deal. All right, so I appreciate the weight of all of that, and our staff appreciates the weight of leading. But listen, and it matters, leadership matters, but don't base it on us. It's on Jesus. And he continues on verse 23, he says that everything belongs to you. Why? Because you belong to Christ. It's a game-changing mindset to know that because we belong to Christ, that, man, the vision is limitless of what God can do. Limitless. As I was thinking about that, I started thinking about how, man, if our love, if our grace, if our forgiveness, if our generosity isn't foolish to a non-believer, when I say non-believer, someone who doesn't follow Jesus, if those things aren't foolish to a non-believer, then are we really any of those things? Like, are we really forgiving and gracious and kind and compassionate and generous if a non-believer says, I don't see any difference in you? Does anything, and I just wonder, the reason that it won't be is because we're just living for ourselves. It's not God-sized dreams or expectations. When God begins to do something, it goes far beyond what you could ever imagine. Let me illustrate it to you this way. Not a lot of people know this part of the story of Hill City. Actually, I think the first service was the first time that I ever shared this publicly. And so in 2007, we were up in New York City in New York School of Urban Ministry, and this guy named Peter was giving this talk, and there was 10 or 12 of us in the room. And Lacey and I were doing college ministry at that time, and so we're sitting there, and he starts getting up there and talking about how churches need to have greater vision. Churches need to think differently. Churches need to stop doing things the way that's just always been done. Like, start thinking about different ways to have different revenue streams and different ways to reach the community, and start doing things that normal church people would say, why are you doing that? And we say, because God has given us the vision to do it. It's like, stop just resting on how things have always been done. And so he's trying to get us all fired up, and he gets up there and he draws this picture, and he goes like this. He draws it like this, and he goes, let's just say this is a church building. All right? And he goes, this church has kind of normal church stuff going on, but what if this church building started thinking really differently? You've got kind of the downtown area over here. You know, you've got maybe some lower income folks over here that are in deep need. You've got maybe middle class folks over here, and then you got like the wealthy people over here. And he goes, and what if this church was like connected to all of these different areas, and they got the money from the wealthy people and maybe some from the middle class, and what happens is this church started thinking everything comes in and goes out. He goes, but what if this church started doing more than that? What if this church started having like different organizations involved and started creating like office space for different organizations, and maybe use their building for different things to make sure it was always going out and not just sitting around 6 days of the week? And what if this church started having all these different revenue systems coming in and enable them to be even far more generous than they could be, because they were creative thinkers and they started thinking about everything differently. So my heart is going like this. And I'm like, this is it. This is what every church is supposed to do. And I'm going, in my brain, I'm going crazy. I'm just waiting for this guy to get done. He gets done and talked to the people that we were with. I'm like, can you believe what Peter was like this and like this? And here's what the people's response was. Yeah, but I mean, that's for them. And New York's different than Richmond. Yeah, that's for them. We're just in a different scenario. I mean, it sounds great, but just we're just going to do something different. I think we've got our path that we're going to go. I'm just like, what? How could you not see that? How could you not feel that? How could you not, and God imprinted that in my soul. That was 2007. 2013, we decided that we want to plant Hill City. And we had all but signed the contract to meet at Albert Hill Middle School. We sat down at Albert Hill Middle School, which is one of the city middle schools, and they were in deep need. They have needs there at Albert Hill. And so we sat down with them. We're like, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to commit to giving $50,000 to the school to help with whatever we need to help with. We're going to meet here every week. We'll pay your custodial staff 2.5 times what they would make to be able to come in here and open up the doors. We want to be over the top generous to you guys. We'll update your technology. We'll do a new teacher's lounge. We'll do all these different things for you guys. Anything you want, we want to help accomplish your dreams for this school. Principal is super excited about it, and so we kind of start moving forward with all this stuff. And about 4.5 months before we start to have our first service, we had our final meeting to sign the contract. We sit down, and before the principal said anything, I looked at Lacey and I go, "It's not happening." And she goes, "What?" I was like, I could feel, literally sitting down, I could feel in the room it wasn't going to happen, and which was crazy to me, because I'm like, man, these city schools like need like some help, and like organizations like ours to come, right? So anyway, 5 minutes later, she says, we're not going to do it. There's been some pushback on this, and so we can't do it. And I was like, okay. And so I was speaking at another event about a week later, and this guy who was on the board here at U-Turn said, hey, we've got some really dingy rooms upstairs that haven't been touched in about 15 years, and we've got this little tiny space that maybe you could start off with that would be really good for you guys, maybe be able to fit, a couple hundred people in there. I was like, awesome, we'll come look at it. And so for some of you guys, you don't know that we've not always been in here. Like we were in a little tiny room for 4 years where, thank God, the fire marshal never came, and it was like craziness. And so all this happens. We're about a year and a half into Hill City, and I just want you to picture this again right here. A year and a half. So that would put us at 2015, 8 years after that meeting up in New York City. And I went and looked at the satellite picture of U-Turn, and here's what I discovered. This is what it looks like. So that's like that side's Ball, and then we got U-Turn over here. And I started thinking to myself, wow. But here's what else I started thinking about. This must mean God wants to do something crazy. Not what Wags can think of, or Lacey can think of, or anyone else in staff can think of. Like something only God could think of, and only God could do. And then he's just wondering, is there going to be a community of kingdom builders or kingdom consumers? Is there going to be a community that thinks like this? Why would we not want to be the kind of community that God-sized vision could be accomplished through? And so I think about that picture all the time now, over the past few years. And here's what's crazy. Adrienne Wright, who's the new president of U-Turn, she comes in. I don't remember her exact starting date, but when she came in, we had our first meeting, which was kind of initial greeting. And then the second meeting we had was about vision for this place. And her vision, and some of this is going to happen, and we're partnering along with that. And so her vision is this, which was God put in my heart long before I knew Adrienne. Long before she even knew it was a vision, and even knew she was going to be working here. And comes in. So do we want to be kingdom builders or kingdom consumers? Do we want to really grasp the expectations that God has for us to see something that we could take a step back? And listen, y'all, 1,400 people coming on a Sunday is already one thing to be like, only God. I mean, less than 2% of churches in America have that. So it's only God already, but I actually think God has something far bigger for us to accomplish if we want to jump in. So here are your 2 minutes to think questions for today as we reflect on this. Number one, what activities of yours could be counted as dishonoring to your body as the temple of God's Holy Spirit? Number two, what part of your life would worldly wisdom consider foolish? And number three, does your generosity increase the pace of completion for God's vision here in Richmond? So we'll put 2 minutes up there, and then I'll close this in prayer.